So, welcome to Microsoft 365 Friday, California. Very excited to be here. It's a perfect end to a perfect week. I've been looking forward to this event for so long. Welcome to Microsoft Teams App Management Fundamentals. My name is Chris Hoard. I'm a Teams MVP from Fusion here in the UK. And just before we get things underway, I just want to say thank you ever so much for the sponsors for making the event possible. To all of the organizers, this is, as said, a very special event today. So what to expect from this session? It's going to be a very quick session on app management, and we're going to break it down into three parts. So the first part is all about the why. Why app management? Why is it important, and why must we consider it when either we're managing our own organization or when we're managing partners or customers? The second part is going to be how we manage applications in Microsoft Teams. So we need to know what tools are available to us today. Last but not least, there are some other considerations that we need to take on board as admin when we're having a conversation about apps. And there's some resources that I'm going to share that we can go on after today and go and have a look at. Now, the level of this session is 200 or intermediate. So all that means is that you have to know a little bit about Microsoft Teams. You don't need to know about the administration, but you have to know something about Teams. The scope, we're going to focus just on the application workload. So when we talk about Teams, we're not here to talk about chat or meetings or calling. This is going to be all about the apps. And just a caveat to this session, Microsoft Teams is rapidly changing. I'm sure you all know that, but 6 to 8 weeks time, we have Microsoft Ignite around once again. We're probably going to hear a lot more about apps, and I'm sure there's going to be some announcements there. So I haven't got long for today's session. Let's get straight into it. So when we start talking about apps, the conversation really begins with the success of Microsoft Teams. And the success of Microsoft Teams is really told in the numbers. So going back to July 2019, when Teams first overtook Slack, that was 13 million daily active users. Now, back in October last year of 2020, we heard that big number, 115 million. It had grown in just over a year, over 100 million daily active users. That's a phenomenal number. And in the short lifetime of Teams, Teams is nearly 4 years old. It's won a lot of accolades, twice. Best in Show at Enterprise Connect. It's won from Gartner, leader in unified communications and meetings. It's overtaken Slack, and as we all know, is closing in on Zoom. Now, why has it grown? Why has this number exploded? Why has it been successful? Well, there's been quite a few reasons. There's not just one. First of all, COVID-19 has changed the way that we work and the way that we live, and businesses all across the world have had to move from being in the offices to remote working. And because they've had to work remotely, they've had to use something like Microsoft Teams. So it's not just Teams where the numbers has gone up, Slack has gone up, Zoom has gone up. COVID and remote working has played a big part in those numbers. But also as well, there's the innovations in Microsoft Teams. So when I think about what's been introduced in Microsoft Teams over this last year or so, we've seen private channels, we've seen custom backgrounds, we've seen the participant report in meetings, we've seen large gallery, we've seen together mode, and we're going to see a lot more. That cadence just keeps going and going. They are continually refining Teams as a product. Thirdly, Teams resonates with us, with our customers. When I'm having a conversation about Microsoft Teams and I'm showing them chat or I'm showing them calling, it resonates by how users want to work today. Microsoft know this, and this is why the fourth reason is the strategic focus of Microsoft. By using Microsoft Teams, you are using a lot of the rest of Microsoft 365. So by having a conversation, we're using Exchange Online. By uploading a file and co-authoring that file, we're using SharePoint or OneDrive. So it's a gateway to the rest of Microsoft 365. It's what we call a converged application. And now we get on to this last area of which we start the conversation about apps, which is this idea of extensibility. Now, extensibility is the software's ability to have the functionality built upon or extended by others. In other words, it's not just about Microsoft Teams, it's about all of the other apps that we're using inside Microsoft Teams. And using Teams as a base and as a surface through which other applications work or which other applications are developed is something that we call Teams as a platform. And this is really the direction in which Teams is heading. We're moving away from Teams just being the hub for collaboration and communication, just for chat, just for meetings, and just for calling. We're starting to use it and bring all these applications into Microsoft Teams, very similar to the way that an operating system such as Windows functions. Now, there's many advantages for doing this. I'm not going to call everyone out that you see on the screen, but we're bringing apps to where our users are working. We're bringing them together. So this both simplifies the way that users access those applications, but also for the way for admins to distribute and manage those apps. It deepens the relationship that we can have between those apps because they are there to start working together in that same surface, which is Microsoft Teams. And there are huge opportunities for Teams as a platform, specifically if you're developing apps. So the opportunity is this: 393% projected return by using Teams as a platform. If you're developers, this really is the opportunity, and apps is the area where you can potentially make most money. 57% of customers that were polled through Forrester that are in the partner opportunity, you will see the sources there below, have said that they want their apps and tools available through a collaboration solution. So this is the intention for IT admins and business owners to have their apps put in Microsoft Teams. And what's more, over 45% of those surveys would pay for upfront or ongoing professional services for ongoing app costs. In other words, it's not just about putting those apps within Microsoft Teams. You've got the opportunity to manage them for managed services moving forward. Now, Microsoft aren't just kind of recommending this. This is not something they just write about. They're actually doing it. So 3 examples: Lists, Yammer, and Tasks for Teams. So when I think about Microsoft Lists has evolved since SharePoint Lists, so lists aren't new. But in developing Microsoft Lists to surface it across the whole Microsoft 365 stack, Microsoft, when they announced it back at Build, said that it wouldn't only be a standalone application, it would also be used and surfaced from Microsoft Teams right from the earliest kind of possibility. It was designed to work as in Teams as well as being a web app and a mobile app. And this is the way that Microsoft are starting to think. When they bring out new apps in Microsoft 365, they are designed to work in Teams. Yammer for many years was separate from Microsoft Teams. Microsoft have recently brought out the Communities app. So what we can now do is pin Yammer inside Microsoft Teams, and we can bring our inner loop communications within our teams and our outer loop communications with the rest of the organization together. People can use them together in a singular experience. And if your experience is like mine, this has really kicked off the use of Yammer in a lot of organizations. Thirdly, with the Tasks for Team, Microsoft have taken 2 disparate apps. They took To Do, which is for your personal tasks, and they took Planner, which is your team tasks, and they put them together within Teams and created Tasks for Teams. That is a recent addition to Microsoft Teams where you can see all of your tasks in one place. So Microsoft are designing their apps for Teams. They want to bring everything there because they know that's where people are working. And they've worked really hard on broadening the extensibility surface, so the places where we can put our apps. Now, today, when we create apps and put them in Teams, we have tabs, we have bots, we have extensions, connectors, and webhooks. But you can now surface them in Teams, in channels, in chat, the UI components, and most recently, you can even surface apps within meetings. So how can we get started with apps? Well, as an organization, we can start to consume apps straight away. There are over 800 now apps that are inbuilt into the Teams App Store. Or we can take app templates off of GitHub and then install them into our environment in order to be able to use. That's if we're consuming apps. If we want to build them, there are many tools that are available. If we go down the full code route, we can use our own tools. So for example, I can create an app where I'm writing in C#, where I'm using Visual Studio, and that the environment that I use for that application is Azure. And then what I do is that I use App Studio within Microsoft Teams and connect that app so that I can surface that app within Microsoft Teams. I can alternatively build using the SharePoint framework. So I'd use a framework such as Angular. I would have tools, open source tools such as Node.js. It will be hosted in SharePoint, and I can then sync it to Teams. So if we're using the full code approach, we would probably have professional developers inside our organization, or we would be working with them. Alternatively, the rise of the Power Platform over the course of the last few years has been explosive. This is low code, no code creation of applications. We would use Power Apps together with the other applications within the Power Platform to be able to easily create our apps without any coding experience. Now, that's not to say that they're not designed for the professional, because they are, but they also allow citizen developers, people with very little development experience, to be able to create apps and again push them into Microsoft Teams. So we can choose to consume apps, we can choose to build them through many different ways, or we can decide to do a bit of both. Now, when we talk about this apps and all the ways that we can surface those apps, it's very exciting, but there are some management challenges potentially with apps. I've experienced it for a long time. I'm sure you have as well. So day one, if an organization deploys Microsoft Teams, all apps are enabled. So if a user starts using Microsoft Teams, they can go into the Teams App Store, then they can select an app and start using it straight away. So any one of those 800 apps, even if you're a small business, all users having access to install any app, that could be a little bit concerning for both admins and for the business owners. All users can light them up in Teams. All users can use them. All users can put your corporate data into those apps, and you may not know where that data is going to be. All users as well can upload their own apps which they build, which might not be apps that are aligned to our organization. So day one out of the box, and I can't begin to tell you how many scenarios I've faced, particularly with small businesses where they don't have dedicated IT, where I've come in, I've started off the conversation. What apps are you using within Microsoft Teams? A, they don't know. B, they put nothing in place in order to control their apps. And C, they couldn't tell you what their users are using or where their data is held. So these are some of the challenges. What apps are my users using? As an admin, I'm very concerned about that. I want to give them the tools that they need to do their best work, but at the same time, I need to know what they are using, because they might be using something that I don't want them to use. Secondly, are my apps, my users are using secure and compliant? Compliant as in my organization may have some regulations that it needs to abide by. It might need to be compliant to law. Is my data allowed in the country where that app is storing its data? Third, are the apps my users using optimal for their role, and are they easy to access? Am I giving the teams the right apps? And I helping them to make the App Store an easy experience for them? And last but not least, is my organization okay with users creating or uploading their own apps? Some organizations are, but others do not want their users, because it's their culture for everything to be managed centrally by IT. So Teams as a platform is a tremendous opportunity for us all. But at the same time, if we do nothing, if we just add people licenses, then we could cause a lot of problems for our organization. So we need to have a think about this. We need to be able to understand what tools we have to control this. So getting into the demo part of the session, okay, the how do we manage apps, right? It doesn't start with the admin. In fact, it can actually start with the owners of each team. So within each and every team, we have team owner settings, the ability to control apps on a team by team basis and prevent members from adding apps to the team if we want to. If we want just the owners to be able to set the apps in that team, we can do. So if I jump into my demo environment, I'm just going to go into the team. You can see that I've created an app management team in advance. Now, if you don't touch the admin settings at all and you start creating teams, then apps are already installed in that environment. So I'm just going to create a new team. I'm going to create it from scratch. This team is going to be private. I'm going to just call it California for demonstration purposes. And then I'm going to create. So that's great. Nice work. I'm just going to bypass adding members because I just want to show you this. So I created my new team and I go to manage team and then I go to the apps. And you can see that there's a list of apps already installed in my team. I might not want those apps in my team, so I would like to uninstall them. So the first thing that we can do as a team owner is install and uninstall apps. I don't want the Praise app, maybe. I'm going to uninstall it. If I want to add another app into my team, I can do. So, okay, I'm going to find that app again. Okay, and then I can open it. Or if I just want to install another app, click on that app and I add it to a team, and then I can add it and it will install, and then I can add that app. So as a team owner, I can remove or I can add applications. But what happens if I need to block my users from adding applications to the team? Well, that's very simple too. So if I click on Manage Team and I go to the settings and then I go to member permissions, then you can see allow members to add or remove apps, allow members to upload customized apps, or allow members to create, update, and remove tabs. So what I would do in this situation is that I would actually remove those permissions, and then all the members of my team, so you can see here, will not be able to add any apps to my team. So if I'm an admin and in my organization, I often have a conversation with all the team owners, so whenever we create a team for them, about this and making sure about whether they want their users to be able to have the ability to add or remove apps from the team. And what's important here is it's not just the store apps to add and remove the apps, but it's to upload customized apps into those teams. So if they've built something via the Power Apps, for example, they will not be able to upload and use that within your team. So really, the kind of the gatekeeper, the one who's got control in the field, as it were, is the actual team owner. Now, team owners do not need to kind of be ignorant of security or compliance. If they've got the ability to install and uninstall apps, if I go back into my demo environment and I go into apps and I go into the store, let's just take a third-party app such as Poly. They can go and have a look at the permissions and look how the app will use your data in the environment and what data will be used by the application. So they can see what the app is going to do. And it's really important, again, when you have this conversation, to show them what access and how it's going to use your data, because that may then make them hesitant before they install it into Microsoft Teams. Going one step further, so again, just going to go back, all the app security information is at this site. So I'm just going to click on this and it's going to open on docs.com. So the security and compliance for the apps in Microsoft Teams, it's surprising how few actually understand this site. If I click on the app, it will give me not only the information about the app, how it will tell you how it handles your data, and how, for security and compliance reasons, and what's very important, it will show you where the data center is. It will show you where, if you're putting your business data into that app, where that data will be held. So they have access to this. So everyone who controls to install apps, whether that's just admins or whether that is team owners, should understand this site. If they want to install an app, they should see where that data is going to be held. Now, moving on, if we go up to the admin level, we have org-wide app settings. So org-wide app settings impact app settings across the whole organization. So if I come into my demo environment, I'm just going to click on the dashboard. You will see here I've got Teams apps, and I'm going to click on Manage Apps. Now, in this section of Manage Apps, this is where the org-wide app settings are, and how basically if we can control turning the apps on or off. I have an app here called 15.5. I don't know what it does. Maybe there's something I don't want my users to have access to. I can simply click on it, click block. It will tell me, and then I block it. And you will see that the status is changed from allowed to blocked. So we have the ability to enable or disable specific apps. As admins, we also have the ability to upload apps. So if we've created them in Power Apps, if I click upload, I'm going to select a file here, and I've got one that I have set up. So here's a Power App that I created earlier. I've selected the file, and that has added the app to my environment. So if I search for it, here is the app that I uploaded in Power App. If I click on it, you will see the details about that app. I can block it, I can allow it, I can install updates, or I can even delete it if I don't want it in my organization anymore. So we can, if we want to, when we build Power Apps and we're looking to install them in our production environment, make this an admin-centric process. We also have org-wide app settings. So we can block the installation of third-party apps. If apps have been created by third parties and to be installed within Microsoft Teams, we can block them completely across the whole organization. The same for custom apps. So if we've created our line of business apps, or if we've created a Power App, this can block everyone inside the organization if we turn off that switch. That will also stop things like developer preview mode within Teams. So through the org-wide app settings, through the managed app page within the TaaP Admin Center, we have these kind of broad brushstrokes. We can kind of say yes or no to specific apps, and we can have somebody in the team working through those apps to actually state, do we want these apps? Do we want them to be shown in the App Store? Because what happens is, if you turn off, if you disable one of these apps, the user experience will be that they cannot see it in the App Store anymore. So if I click on that and it's blocked, the users will not be able to see. So if I come into my team in this App Store, that app will no longer appear here. So we can really craft what the App Store looks like for our users. Now moving on, past the org-wide app settings, we have app permission policies. App permission policies are all designed to set which apps your users can use and which ones can't. So let's say, okay, that we've gone through, we've either enabled or disabled all of the applications. Now which ones can users or sets of users use within inside my organization? Let me show you. It's best to show you with this. So I'm going to jump in again to the Teams Admin Center, and I'm going to go to permission policies. Now, by default, we have a global org-wide policy. In other words, when we first set up Teams, every single user in your organization is assigned this global org-wide policy. And as you can see, all Microsoft apps are allowed, all third-party apps are allowed, and all custom apps are allowed. So everything's on, everything's open for them for you to use. Now, what you could do, for example, is you can say, I want all my Microsoft apps. I don't want to allow, I want to block all third-party apps, and I want to block custom apps. It could be very black and white for your organization, but we have some choices. First of all, we can allow all apps. We can allow specific apps and block others. So in other words, we can allow just the apps we know we specifically want to use and block all others. We can block specific apps and allow others. So for example, we block only apps we know we don't trust and we know we're never going to use inside the organization, or we can outright block all apps. So in the global policy for all my users, the one of which is assigned, I'm going to allow all the Microsoft apps. I'm going to allow specific apps and block all others. So I'm going to allow, for example, Poly. I know that lots of people like Poly. I'm also going to allow Jira because I have some devs that use Jira and I want to use connectors in order to connect it to Teams. So I'm going to click allow. You can see now I allow all the Microsoft apps and these two specific third-party apps, and I'm going to keep custom apps blocked. So I click save. So I've set that global org-wide policy. That is going to apply to all users. But what happens if I have a group of users that I want to give more access to? How do I differentiate? Well, we would create a custom policy. So I click add. I would start creating a new custom app permissions policy. I would allow all Microsoft apps. I'm going to allow all apps, and I'm going to allow them. I'm going to allow this specific people who are assigned that app policy. All I need to do at that point is go to my users. Let's say I've got a user here, Vesku. I'm going to go to policies. And if I scroll down to my app permissions policy, okay, so I'm going to edit that policy for him. I'm going to give Vesku the custom app policy. So he's got permissions to access any app. The others will only be able to access the Microsoft apps, those two third party, and they will not be able to use custom apps. So remember, it doesn't just have to be a case of all or nothing. You can amend the global policy, you can assign custom policies to specific sets of users, or you can set several custom policies for different sets of users depending upon what you want to use. So it's quite granular in this respect. You also have app setup policies. So app setup policies customize the experience for your users in the app bar. So the app bar is down the left-hand side of Teams. The app bar is what we refer to here on the left that you can see with all of my apps, files, calls, and calendar. So if I go into the admin center and I click on setup policies, again, a global org-wide policy is assigned to all of your users to start out with. Now, you can give users on a user basis the ability to upload custom apps. You can allow them to pin apps to that app rail. You can pre-install apps for users, so pre-install personal apps, or you can even define what their app rail actually looks like. So say I want to add to this. I would add an app. I would search on an app. Again, I'm going to use Power Automate, I think. I want users to access Power Automate from the left-hand app rail of Microsoft Teams. I click add, and then what I do is once that is propagated, or once I save that, it's fallen off the screen there a little bit, but once I save that, in a couple of hours time, once users log out and log back in, then Power Automate will show below the files in their Microsoft Teams client. So we can define what that app rail looks like. We can define what apps are installed for them. We can define if they can upload Power Apps or their own apps using App Studio into the environment on a user by user basis. So app setup policies, again, you can set up like the app permission policies. You can set up a global policy, or you can set up a custom policy. If you want different views of the app rail for different sets of users, my IT team could use Power Automate, Power BI, and Power Apps, whereas my service desk team could use something like Poly. And we can define different experiences for different users inside the organization. And what's important is that app setup policies don't just apply to the app bar on the desktop, it also to the mobile as well. Last but not least, we have controlling custom apps. Now, I've spoken about custom apps all through this kind of demonstration part, but if you're kind of want somebody to be able to have the permissions to upload a custom app, if they create it within Power Apps and then suddenly want to install it inside the environment, it's important as an admin to decide how and who will have the ability to install it. And it's a combination of permissions in different places. So first of all, jumping back into the demo environment, we start at the top. Under the managed apps, under the org-wide settings, whether you can install custom apps into the environment or not is defined in the Teams Admin Center. If that's off, nobody's going to be able to install them. If it's on, it then becomes either permissions at the team level or at the user level. So first of all, it needs to be defined in a Teams Admin Center. Secondly, it needs to be defined in the team. So if I go into my Teams environment and I click on my team, so here's my app management team, and then I go back to what we did at the beginning and click on settings, then that person within the team would need to have permissions to be able to add apps to the team. So if they wanted to build a Power App and to surface that Power App within an actual team, they would need team permissions right here in the team owner settings. If they just wanted to upload basically an app or a Power App to use personally, then that is actually set in the admin control panel as well. That's actually defined in their app setup policy. So going back and we go to the setup policy and we click inside the setup policy, this is where it needs to be. And that needs to be turned on. If that isn't turned on, the user will not be able to upload a custom app. Just going to show you where that is. So it's in the App Store. They would not see this whatsoever. That will disappear. So whether you can or whether you can't is a combination of all these three. And you will see a table there, and hopefully you will receive the slide decks. You can have different combinations to have different outcomes. So you kind of really need to read it to see what you want to achieve. So we've talked about the why, we've talked about the how, but there is some other considerations if we're an administrator and when it comes to apps. The first is distribution. Okay, how are you going to apply your app policies to users? So imagine that I've created my app permissions policy and I've created my app setup policy. How am I going to apply that? Because it can make a big difference depending upon the size of your organization. We can directly assign it, app policies to users. You saw me assign an app permissions policy to Vesku in a Teams Admin Center. But what happens if we've got 400 users? We're not going to want to go through it one by one. Well, you can use what they call group policy. You can't do that in a Teams Admin Center. You need to do that in PowerShell. Or you can even apply a policy package. So inside, okay, of the Teams Admin Center, you will have policy packages, and those policy packages, if I was to click inside that, okay, they would have app setup policies or they would have app permission policies. Coming shortly is the ability to create custom policy packages. So you can create a custom one and assign an app permissions or an app setup policy as part of your policy package to hundreds, if not thousands of users at the same time. Secondly, we also not only have to consider distribution, we have to consider security. How are you going to access those apps? So you have to consider things like multi-factor authentication and conditional access, Intune, mobile app management through Intune, potentially using cloud app security to monitor what apps they're actually using when they're connecting to the service. Also as well, whether we want to be able to give what they call resource-specific consent for applications to team owners. So rather than admins having that privilege, we push it out to team owners who would know best whether to install that app or not. Distribution, security, and also standardization. So we have what we call Teams templates within inside our environment. So we go to Teams and we have a template. And under each template, so whether it's one of the I guess the prepackaged templates or whether we add a template of our own, let me just click into one. We can set which apps are in a team when a new team is created. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, the Teams template kind of functionality is quite basic at the time. You probably want to have a third-party app such as SalesTeam. Have a look at SalesTeam. It gives really great governance control over applications within Teams environments and which apps are deployed in what teams. They can, you probably want to go beyond the native functionality when it comes to Teams templates. Also, as said, cloud app security, not just in terms of seeing what apps that users are using in your Microsoft 365 environment, but the fact that we can set sanctioned and unsanctioned applications. So if we use cloud app security in addition to Defender for Endpoint, for example, then we can actually block users on their machine from actually using those apps, regardless of the settings that we have within Teams. Last but not least, if we're going to go down into the app development kind of territory, we need to familiarize and understanding ourselves with the tools for building apps, Power Apps, App Studio, the new Fluent that's coming in. Why do we need to do this? Because if we have developers inside our environment, we're going to need to give them a lot more access to apps that aren't necessarily used in other parts of our organization. In fact, we might actually want to, and I would recommend this, building a proof of concept environment, building a test environment that sets us kind of it outside your production environment. And indeed, before going ahead and installing any app, you really should test it out maybe with a few users in a different environment to your own. Last but not least, we have user voice. Okay. App management within Microsoft Teams isn't the finished article. We still have some way to go. Myself and others have been very vocal to Microsoft on this. So some of the user voices you will see open include an enhanced Teams app usage report. In that Teams Admin Center, I want to be able to see what every user has in terms of accessing their applications. So I want to be able to click on that user and I want to see another tab, and I want to underneath that tab see every app in every team that they have access to, because then I can literally see if that user is supposed to have access to that app. The amount of times I walk into an organization, as I said at the start, and they don't know what apps they're using. They don't even know what their policies are. They've never accessed the Teams Admin Center. So if I could see that right from the very start and do a discovery as to what apps they're using in Teams, that would make our life a lot more easier. Secondly, manage app access via group membership. That would be a great one. If we could apply policy not just through PowerShell, but in the Teams Admin Center in the same way, you can do group policy with messaging policies or with calling policies. And last but not least, I would actually like to see, and I'm for this one, is to hide the App Store for specific users. Users can't miss sometimes what they don't know about. So finishing up in terms of resources, there's a lot more that you can look to. I mean, today was just skimming the surface. You can go to microsoftdocs.com, Microsoft Learn, the Microsoft CDX platform, or the public video platforms such as YouTube or Udemy. They will probably have content on this as well. But I don't want to think that this is the last you hear of this. If this is something that has interested you, please go on and find out more. So returning to outcomes, we looked at why app management is important. App management is important because the use of applications in Microsoft Teams through Teams as a platform is exploding. With the exploding use, the growth of Teams has gone up from 13 million, just almost a year and a half, to over 115 million daily active users. The more users that are using Teams, the more apps that are going to be installed, the more vendors that are going to be attracted to the platform. That 800 apps that we have in the store is probably going to double over the next few years. More and more organizations are going to be getting into developing their own apps for their own business cases, either via full code solutions or via no code, low code like the Power Platform. In consequence, our job to manage those apps is only going to get tougher with users using more apps. So it's important that we understand this now. How? We saw Owners, team owner settings, they can be managed right down in the field on the ground level. From an admin perspective, we have org-wide settings, we have app permission policies, we have app setup policies. We have the ability to define whether users can upload custom apps or not. And in other considerations, it's not just about the specific tools in the Teams Admin Center. We need to consider how we're distributing our apps to our Teams users, how secure that those apps are. Are we standardizing how users are using apps through things like Teams templates or Microsoft Cloud App Security? And what tools are we verifying the tools we use to build and giving our developers the kind of right segregated permissions? Last but not least, okay, we directed at some resources. So this has been a level 200 session, an intermediate session. I really hope you've enjoyed it. It's an area that I'm passionate about. I keep bugging Microsoft on all that added functionality and those user voices I talked about. So I'm probably ticking them off slightly. This focused purely on Teams applications. It's a really exciting area of Microsoft Teams. But of course, as always, as I say on pretty much every session, it's rapidly changing. Ignite's around the corner. I'm sure there's going to be more announcements. So I'd like to thank you ever so much for coming today. I'm speaking again in a week's time in a couple of more events and for the next few months. Please feel free to join them. And do we have any questions? So I'm just going to come off the sharing my screen. So I'm just going to stop presenting so that I can actually see the chat. All right, so let's go through. Okay. In terms of want the recording or slides, okay, the slides I will put through to the team so that they can distribute those slides to you. I think the recording, yeah, there's been a recording, so I'm sure you'll have access to that. Let's go back up through this. Yes, I want that too on the user voice. Okay, I will put the user voices through on the links to the team. Thank you ever so much for your feedback. Thank you very much for your feedback. So there's been some, I'm glad this has resonated with people. So app policies to groups instead of individual users. Yes, like I said, Jeanette, you can apply them via PowerShell, but PowerShell only. So if you look for app setup and app permissions policies in PowerShell, you'll be able to do that. I'd love to see that go into the Teams Admin Center. Can you assign custom policies via group? Not as far as I'm aware. The custom policies are defined, okay, at the org level, at the team level, and at the app setup. I mean, essentially, you may be able to, if you apply an app setup policy to all the individual members of a particular group, you can't apply it to the group itself. I'd love to see that. I'd love to be able to see the application to groups instead of just individual users. Okay. Any more? Okay. Our tenants need spring cleaning. Yeah, you're going to get a situation where you're probably with and you'll go back in, you'll look at things a little bit differently, and you think you might need to do a bit of. One great way, like I say, is use Microsoft Cloud App Security along with Defender for Endpoint, because what'll happen is that the endpoint that's installed on the machines will feed back into Microsoft Cloud App Security and actually show what apps your users are using. You can start with that app list, and then you can normally track it down to Microsoft Teams, but they need to improve this within a Teams Admin Center. We've had people using apps that we did not want before somebody got around to deactivating them in the admin center. Yeah, you're going to find that situation. You will need to do probably an all-up audit. Now, it doesn't maybe not just have to be down to yourself. You could maybe create a number of teams champions that can go around and work with the users as to what apps they're actually using, and then set a date, for example, to turn off or disable certain apps, so you can work together collectively in order to do that. We've had people using apps that we did not want before somebody got around to deactivating. Yeah, okay, I've just said that. The certification program for Teams apps by Microsoft is a great safety guarantee. That's true. So when I showed you that docs page that showed you with the data on it for where the data centers were, it will also show about whether the app has been certified and has gone through validated. So Microsoft have worked, and all credit to them, very hard on making a very robust process for installing. So, but you will want to see that app is certified. Now, there's two places to see whether it's certified: on the docs page or in the Teams admin center. So in that managed apps section, scroll down the list and you'll see if the app is certified. Okay. Okay. You can prevent users using the store from the team admin, or can you limit apps to only the certified by Microsoft? So yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Gilam, I see that you know this well. Things like lists, planner, OneNote, but the stuff from the internet may not be safe. Yeah, of course. I think people are always a little bit nervous when it comes to third-party apps. That's why what probably recommended is go into the app permissions policies first of all, along with the manage app sections. If there are apps you're definitely unsure about, turn them off, disable them, or you set an app permission policy on what people can use. So yes to the Microsoft apps. Have what I showed you in the demonstration, so that you say yes to specific apps but block all others. And then what you can do is review the apps in another kind of demo tenant, a pre-production environment, make sure that they're safe, and then light it up in your production environment. Okay. Okay. Now I'm going to go through some of the rest because I'm getting conscious of time, and the next user is going to come in. Okay. I'd just like to say, everyone, thank you ever so much for taking the time. Please feel free. I'll just put it up again just for one moment. Please feel free, if you've got any more questions, to shoot me an email. My email address is chris.hoard@fusion.cloud. I'll pop it in the chat in a second. You can follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn. My blog is microsoft365pro.co.uk. I will be speaking next week in Teams Community Day Germany on policy management. Now, that policy management is all about applying policies, including app policies, onto users. So it could be a good follow-up if you wanted to know about the distribution of apps. It might lock in together, but please feel free to reach out to me. But I think I've talked to you long enough. I hope it's been a worthwhile session. I just want to say again, thank you ever so much, and it's been a real privilege, and thank you for all the great feedback, and I hope I can speak for you again.